From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. First up today, K-State's Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz will talk about top-dressing fertilizer on winter wheat. In addition to nitrogen top-dress management decisions, he'll address the potential needs for top-dressing chloride and sulfur. Following then, K-State's Dallas Peterson on possible herbicide applications that could be combined with that top-dress fertilizer. And he'll talk about the newly required training K-State will provide for those who'll be applying the new dicamba herbicide products to dicamba-resistant soybeans and cotton. Also, K-State's Robin Reid and Mykel Taylor will tell us that there's one more of those Farming for the Future sessions K-State will be hosting this Monday in Emporia. And in with Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. All right here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. To open up this Wednesday edition, a look at winter wheat. And given that some of the wheat stands out there are maybe a bit suspect as to their condition, is it still worthwhile to top dress nitrogen on that wheat? Some thoughts today from Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz along that line. As you know, Dorivar is a research and extension crop nutrient specialist at Kansas State University. And this is a question that does come up about every winter, Dorivar. Should one go ahead and put the expense into top dressing if their wheat stands are maybe not optimal?
Yes, Eric, and especially this year, like you mentioned, the stands are not very good. We do have some limited moisture in good part of the state, and those are big questions when it comes to investing, putting more money in fertilizer, nitrogen this time of the year. But a few things that we have to keep in mind, of course, one of the advantage of doing top dress or versus putting all pre-plant nitrogen is that we do have a little bit of flexibility coming this time, evaluate the conditions of each specific field and decide whether or not we need to put that full rate or maybe cut back on the rate a little bit depending on, again, the conditions we have. Of course, right now we may not see a lot of the full condition of those fields. One possibility is to wait a little bit later, closer to green up. We'll have a better idea of soil moisture. We'll see what the stance looks like, and at that point maybe do the top dress application. In other words, maybe one approach this year could be to wait a little bit longer and not do the top dressing at this point, but maybe wait a little bit and see what kind of conditions we have moving forward in the early spring.
And that does no harm as far as the overall yield potential of that crop if you wait until just ahead of green up with a top dress.
No, that will not cause any issues. Of course, there's a point there. We want to have that nitrogen just before joining, if all possible. That will be the ideal timing. But again, if we wait a little bit until just starting green up, we make a better evaluation of the stands and also soil moisture, that will be a good time to do it. But yes, you're right. We also don't want to wait too much, and especially we have to try and do it before joining, if all possible. That will give us the time for that nitrogen to move into the root zone, as well as, of course, avoiding any potential damage that we may cause from top dressing of wheat that is already actively growing.
Dorivar, if a producer is of a mind to top dress but still is thinking of economizing, you mentioned adjusting rates. How much, if at all, would one want to pare back on those rates?
Yes, and a lot of that, Eric, will depend on what kind of rates we already put pre-plan or starter at planting time and so on. So we have to kind of go back to the plan that we have in place before planting in terms of what yield potential we typically expect from those fields and what is the total nitrogen we have there, both nitrogen apply with fertilizer as well as any maybe maybe profile residual nitrate from previous years. One thing that I also want to emphasize in this case is that we have to be careful not to cut too much the rates. And this is also important because, we're always surprised about the resilience of the wheat crop. And if we do have those rains later on, we can have some yield potential. So my point is cutting back completely on nitrogen may not be the right decision. Mm-hmm. And this is something important to keep in mind. Of course, fields are very poor stand. If we are looking at some potential winter kill in some cases, in some fields, of course, we should consider reducing the rates. And those will be based on what kind of reduction in yield potential you are seeing. In other words, if we are seeing a lower yield potential, we have to make a proportional adjustment to the nitrogen rates based on that. But again, cutting back completely the nitrogen typically is not a good decision because, again, suddenly nitrogen becomes a limiting factor if we are not putting that nitrogen fertilizer.
Dorivar, as you've observed the field conditions around Kansas of late, are there any thoughts that need to be shared on placement of the product? Should one choose to top dress?
Yes, and those are always key points to keep in mind, source and as well as placement of nitrogen fertilizer. Of course, if we are talking about no-till systems where we have a fair amount of crop residue there, tie-up of nitrogen can be a concern with top dressing. And in that kind of situation, we usually prefer to use, if we're using liquid, we should be considering using streamer bars, dribble that nitrogen through the residue and hopefully get in the soil and minimize basically the contact with that residue. That will be one situation where it's very important to pay attention to placement because, again, we do have that potential for tie-up. So broadcasting liquid will not be as efficient as if we are, again, dribbling liquid or if we are using dry fertilizer, which actually can move through that residue and get in the soil much more effectively. So, again, that's a key point. Again, especially in no-till systems, we have heavy residue that could be particularly important. In other systems where we have conventional tillage, for example, that may be less relevant. We do have a little bit more flexibility. But, of course, again, any type of placement where we are trying to move that nitrogen in the soil directly will always tend to be more efficient, minimize losses, either from tie-up, as well as some potential volatilization, which typically is very minimum this time of the year. But again, given the conditions, especially if we are putting this nitrogen a little bit later, warmer temperature, we may have a little bit of that in some cases.
Now, when we discuss top dressing for winter wheat, we always focus on nitrogen, but there are other nutrients that you'd like producers to give due consideration to as well as possible candidates for top dressing, those being chloride and sulfur, you say.
Yes, and this could be an excellent time for those two nutrients. Remember that chloride and sulfur are mobile nutrients, just like nitrogen. So top dressing time could be a good moment to apply those two nutrients. And again, a lot of these will depend on where we are in the state, what kind of soils we have, and so on. In the case of chloride in particular, we do tend to see more responses in the central part of the state, where we don't have any history of potassium chloride application, and we do have some level of leaching of chloride that we tend to see a pretty consistent benefit from chloride. For those in the central part of the state, chloride is always something to watch for. And sulfur is something that's becoming more common in parts of the state, and particularly in the eastern half of the state. It seems like we're seeing more and more sulfur deficiency show up. And again, this is something that we can, a nutrient that we can apply also at top dressing time. Now, in the case of sulfur, a few other things that we have to keep in mind. We do have different types of sulfur fertilizers, basically different sources, and availability could be different. And in this case, in the case of sulfur, we really need to be using sulfate forms when we are doing top dress application. Sulfate is basically immediately available to the plant. And again, if we are talking about top dressing, we need that nutrient to be available basically immediately. We do have other options for sulfur, elemental sulfur. Many people use elemental sulfur, but those really are more suited for pre-plant application, leave enough time for that sulfur to hydrolyze and basically become available. So again, something to pay attention in this case, in the case of sulfur, is what kind of sources we are looking at. For top dressing, really needs to be a sulfate form.
And in regard to rates of application, hopefully one has soil test information on hand to make that call. But if they don't, any general guidelines there?
Yes, excellent point. Of course, especially for chloride, we do have a fairly well-calibrated soil test for profile soil test, 24 inches. But if we don't have those values, to give you an idea, typically the research we have shows that the maximum application rate for chlorides is usually about 20 pounds. In other words, we don't see further response to any rates above 20 pounds. So typical rates between 10 and 20 pounds of chloride are in our recommendation, again, based on soil test information. In the case of sulfur, we also do have a soil test based on the profile because it's a mobile nutrient. And application rates are usually also fairly low. Remember, these are secondary nutrients, micronutrients in the case of chloride. And again, the rates are required are usually not very high. The highest response we usually see with about 20 to 30 pounds is typically all we need for most conditions, also in the case of sulfur.
If a producer is not as well acquainted with either of these nutrients and their management, chloride, sulfur, there's information out there on the agronomy website out of K-State that can provide more background on this then, right?
Yes. In the soil testing lab, we do have guidelines for recommendations, either using soil tests or also using default values for recommendations.
Once again, producers, you've time to make final decisions yet on your top dressing intentions for the current winter wheat crop, but at least be thinking about these things, Dorivar, at this point in time.
Yes, absolutely. We need to be thinking about this. In the case of nitrogen, again, is something that we have to evaluate every field basically individually. And again, there are some fields that could be fairly decent conditions, but like you mentioned, we also have some that are struggling, and we need to evaluate those individually and make adjustments accordingly.
Timely input there, and we thank you for coming over and sharing these thoughts, Dorivar.
Thank you.
Once again, on top dress decisions for winter wheat stands, Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz is a crop nutrient specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Now, one management alternative that could be considered along with this is including a herbicide treatment along with that top dress application. We'll pick up on that with our next guest after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on This Agriculture Today, and as promised, we'll talk now about the practicalities of weed control in winter wheat, coupled with a top dress fertilizer application. For alongside now is weed management specialist Dallas Peterson of K-State Research and Extension. We'll take that topic up as well as discuss the requirements for special training for the use of the unique dicamba herbicide products and systems, which have made the news here in the last year or so. More on that in a moment. But to this, Dallas, there is a chance to perhaps affect some control on certain broadleaf weeds in winter wheat with this top dress herbicide combo?
Well, certainly that's been a pretty popular treatment over the years, especially with the residual products, first kind of starting with Glean, but then with Finesse and Amber and Rave and those sulfonylurea herbicides that have good residual activity. And it makes sense if you can make that operation in one pass where you apply your nutrients along with your herbicide, and it can be effective that you might want to do that. There are a lot of factors, however, that will influence whether you want to do that weed and feed in one operation or not. And certainly this year we're having a pretty severe winter again, it seems like, and that might kind of play into that decision as well.
Expand on that. The conditions themselves will dictate whether or not you'll get the efficacy you're looking for in this treatment?
Well, again, it depends upon the product that you're choosing to apply. And as I indicated, the residual products oftentimes do work well in that weed and feed combination. And so the finesse has been a really popular one, for example, where we can apply that in combination with the fertilizer. The weeds and the wheat do not need to be actively growing, because once we get some rainfall, following as we move into the spring, that will activate the herbicide, and it can be absorbed not just through the foliage of those weeds, but also through the roots. And so it can tend to be pretty effective. But if you have a product that is primarily foliarly active and needs to be absorbed through that green tissue, and you don't have a lot of green tissue out there anymore because it's gotten so cold that it's kind of burned down, well, then those products are not going to be very effective.
The products, do they vary in their extent of residual activity then?
Well, they do, but again, it's primarily finesse, glean, amber, rave, those kind of products that have those primary active ingredients in them that are going to be effective in this weed and feed type operation during this kind of dormant season. Now, once things start to green up, then the other herbicides can be more effective as well. And as you get later into the spring, oftentimes you can have some issues by combining the two. If the weed is getting too big, you have a lot of issues. You can have more burn from your fertilizer, actually, maybe having some negative effect there. Coverage becomes an issue as far as getting your herbicide down through that canopy and onto the weeds so that it can be absorbed and do its job as well. So, again, that's kind of that late dormant season treatment for the residual treatments where it seems to work most effective. For the more foliarly active herbicides, it's once that weed and the weeds start to green up and actively grow, but then not too late into the season where they can also be effective.
Well, then, Dallas, with any of those options, does one need to concern oneself with compatibility with the fertilizer product in this weed and feed approach?
Yeah, it is. Certainly, you have to watch and read the labels as to whether it's approved to combine those two together. For example, we would never want to add an amine formulation of 2,4-D or MCPA to fertilizer. They are not compatible, and you will have many problems, cleaning out the tank and the sprayer and everything else. So you need to make sure that the herbicide is compatible with the fertilizer. And it's always best to mix the herbicide and kind of get it dissolved into a little bit of water, actually, before going ahead and adding it to that fertilizer blend.
Mm-hmm. Study the label, study the information on product activity, and be sure that what you're putting down is going to be worth your while and get the job done.
Yeah, again, it varies a lot from one year to the next. Some years the wheat hardly goes dormant in the weeds, and so then, we have a wider spectrum of time in which we can make those applications, then they can be effective. This year is a little bit different. Probably it's going to be a little bit later before that wheat greens up and takes off. Again, the only products you'd want to use in the weed and feed operation at this point in time through probably the early part of March would be those with primarily residual activity, or that have both foliar and residual activity.
And as always, we would defer to the updated chemical weed control guide from K-State, which goes over all of these options for weeding and feeding winter wheat during the upcoming weeks around Kansas. Changing gears, Dallas, and you're well immersed in this currently likewise. This has to do with dicamba herbicide, the specific technology with dicamba resistance, primarily soybeans, cotton as well. And with the issues that have arisen with this over the last several months, there has been a new regulation in as far as applications of these products.
Well, last year was the first year in which we had Xtend soybeans and cotton. And, of course, those were technologies that made those crops resistant to dicamba herbicide. Dicamba herbicide is not new. It's been around for 40 or 50 years. It was initially introduced as Banville herbicide, and then we had Clarity herbicide. But the use on these crops certainly was new. Over the years, we've had issues with dicamba drift to susceptible crops, and soybeans have been one of those crops that is very susceptible to dicamba. But now, within the last year then, we have introduced crops to which we can apply dicamba to those crops. And so they introduced 3 new products specifically for use on the Xtend soybeans and cotton. The new dicamba products are called Extendamax, Fexapan, and Ingenia. All 3 of those have lower volatility than the older formulations of Banville or Clarity. Banville, Clarity, and the generic dicamba are not labeled for use on Xtend crops. And it was hoped that with the new low volatile formulations, when we made those applications in the vicinity of, say, susceptible soybeans that were not dicamba resistant, that we wouldn't have major issues with non-target injury. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We had a lot of cases of soybeans in particular that were injured from probably drift of dicamba from applications on the Xtend crops. And so because of all the issues last year, these products were reclassified from general use products to restricted use products. And that means that anybody that wants to purchase and apply these products needs to be a certified applicator. But in addition to that, there are a number of other requirements for the use of the Extendamax, Ingenia, and Fexapan products. Besides being a certified applicator, you also have to receive training for dicamba application or auxin-specific training before you can apply these products. And that's, again, above and beyond the certification process. That's something that is taking place right now. It took a while for it to get in place, if you will. In fact, it's still kind of evolving a little bit. The dicamba training is going to be proctored by the 3 companies that manufacture these products. That would be Monsanto, DuPont, and BASF. And K-State Research and Extension also has gotten approval from the Kansas Department of Ag to do that dicamba-specific training. And so that's something that we're doing at a lot of our meetings right now. Again, the companies are doing it. We are doing it. Just, again, a reminder that anybody that wants to apply these products, however, has to get that training before they can apply those products this summer.
And you've had a few meetings already, but you're planning to canvass the state with meetings so that any producer so inclined to use this technology can have access to said training.
Yeah, it's an interesting process and something that we've not had to do before. And again, part of the issue, I think, is just getting that word out. Hopefully everybody is aware of that. But then getting everybody trained that needs to be trained is going to be the next difficult part, I think, because, again, this includes all private and commercial applicators that plan to apply these products needs to have this training. The training typically lasts about an hour and a half. And we are trying to incorporate the training as a part of our other weed management extension programs. And so we have probably at least a couple dozen meetings currently on the schedule for the next month or so, and there will probably be some other ones added to that schedule as time goes along.
The best bet for producers who do want this training is to stay in contact with their local extension personnel as to the training opportunity closest to them.
Yeah, that's right. We actually have started to post some of the sites where the training will be offered on the KSU IPM applicator training website, so you might look for that. We also have an article in the most recent e-update newsletter that will give you a link to where those trainings are going to be occurring over the next month and a half to 2 months.
So be heads up for those chances to be trained to use this dicamba technology on the aforementioned soybean and cotton crops that are resistant to dicamba. Do go to agronomy.ksu.edu, track down that article in the e-update series that covers this subject and these very training sessions that are coming up. And Dallas, as always, we appreciate you coming over. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
He is a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Is Dallas Peterson. You're listening to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, a visit about a series of meetings that we have talked of previously here on the broadcast in advance of these taking place. And there's one more yet to go, referring to the Farming for the Future sessions that K-State Agricultural Economics has been hosting. Along with us once again is agricultural economist Mykel Taylor, as well as her colleague Robin Reid from Agricultural Economics K-State Research and Extension. Robin, to you first. The Farming for the Future sessions, there were 4 of these. One had to be rescheduled because of the weather. Right out the chute here, we want to let folks know about what's been rearranged, if you would.
Sure, Eric. We were supposed to be in Emporia last week, and as we know, we had some pretty snowy and icy conditions across northeast, north-central Kansas, and even down towards Emporia. So we have that rescheduled now to January 22nd. That's next Monday. It will still be the same program. So if you couldn't make it last week, we hope you'll join us for January 22nd next week.
And folks that want to take that in need to reserve their spot fairly soon now, presumably, right?
Yes, we'll need reservations by noon on Friday. If you already registered, we're going to contact you and make sure you can still come. But if you were not able to make it the first time, go ahead and get on agmanager.info. You can use our credit card registration site there, or contact Brian Reese down at our Emporia Extension office and get registered that way.
And just to refresh folks' memory as to what this program will cover, if they can attend it in Emporia, what are some of the general themes?
Sure. So we're going to have a lot of outlook talks on this program, kind of trying to prepare producers for what they might see in the coming year and years with this down economy. So we're going to have a grain market outlook, beef cattle market outlook. Mykel Taylor here is going to do our overview of the farm economy and land values and rental rates. We're going to touch on FSA programs again this year, since we see those are critical for producers in this economy. Input cost outlook will be included, and a popular one this year is the macroeconomic and interest rate outlook that Dr. Brian Brueggemann has been doing for us. And then we're going to wrap it up with a general discussion on farm financial management and what you need to be focusing on in the economic times that we're seeing.
So all of that comprises this Farming for the Future meeting taking place in Emporia this coming Monday, January the 22nd. And these have been dovetailed with these opportunities for farm families to enroll in one of these financial workshops. And those are still available as well, Robin.
Yes, so we got a little snow on the workshop last week in Salina. We had to do some rearranging, but we've been through that workshop now. We have Kingman coming up next week. But if you do want to get in on one of those workshops, we still have Dodge City, Colby, and Emporia coming up. And we're calling these workshops, but what it really is a one-on-one appointment with a farm analyst from K-State. The appointment's 4 hours long, and you turn in your financial worksheets ahead of time so we can be prepared for the appointment when you get there. It is a very valuable 4 hours just to take a critical outside look at your operation, see what net farm income and cash flow might be looking like for the next year, and how that might be improved through small or big changes to your operation.
There are 3 of those sessions still available, and again, the dates for those as well as the locations, Robin?
So the dates for the Farm Financial Workshops, February 7th in Colby, February 8th in Dodge City, and then February 12th and 13th in Emporia. We'll be taking appointments for all of those days.
And register for those as soon as possible, presumably.
Yes. We need the financial information by the 31st of January, so we're asking you to register as soon as possible to get an appointment time that'll work for your schedule, for one thing. But the sooner the better, so we can plan around having enough farm analysts for those workshops. And all the registrations for those should come through me, and you can go to agmanager.info looking up the financial workshops to find my contact information.
Those are outstanding opportunities for farm families to work through what may be some of the headier questions in regard to their economic status here going into 2018. Look into that once more at agmanager.info. Now, Robin, we brought Mykel along with you to talk a bit about these Farming for the Future sessions that have taken place already, and moreover, some of the lead questions, matters of interest that have popped up as the two of you and your colleagues have worked with producers at these meetings. What comes to mind, Mykel, immediately along that line?
Well, one of the big topics that we're talking about is land values, and looking at how land values have declined since 2015. We have estimates of them from the non-irrigated side as being down between about 18 and 20% since 2015 through the third quarter of 2017. And that's a pretty big deal to have that kind of a decline in the statewide land value number. Now, there's certain parts of the state that haven't seen much of a decline at all, and they've held pretty steady. And there's other parts of the state that have seen more of a decline, and they're maybe in the 30% area. So that's a point of conversation. Another thing is just understanding that we've come out of the fourth year of a downturn economy, and it's a slow bleeding that's occurring out there, and people asking, the question of not just maybe when's it going to turn around, but also, what can we do to keep things working and moving forward as long as this is going to last.
But when you talk of the land values, that has been something of a reassurance, the equity that has remained in those values, even as commodity prices have come down. Now, if that's chipping away, that lends a new layer of worry.
Sure, that makes your banker nervous, to be honest, because that's what we're lending on now. I mean, cash flows haven't been good enough to lend on cash flow for a couple of years now, in general. And so we really are relying on the equity in those land values. And now we just need to take a second look at that and be real conservative with what kind of equity we're putting on the balance sheet and what we're pricing that land at, and just be conservative so that we don't find ourselves in a bad situation.
And Robin, you were part of one of these meetings as well. And what did you pick up from producers?
Well, through the farm financial meetings and this Farming for the Future, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of different producers out there. And the thing that strikes me is how each producer is in a very unique situation, where some are posed to take advantage of the downturn and maybe expand their operation if they have the cash reserves to do it. Other ones that I've seen are upside down on their balance sheet already and are definitely struggling in this financial time. So there's all spectrums of the board, and I guess that's why we're focusing on individual help this year, is just to see what the operation can do differently, knowing that going forward these financial times may endure for quite a while.
Well, once again, there is one more of these Farming for the Future meetings taking place, and it's been rescheduled now. It is still in Emporia, and it's coming up this Monday, January the 22nd. Contact the Lyon County Extension Office as soon as possible to reserve your spot for that meeting. Robin, Mykel, thank you for coming over.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Agricultural economists, K-State Research and Extension, Robin Reid and Mykel Taylor on this part of Agriculture Today. And we'll be back after this over the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I do have a few purple handkerchiefs, which come in handy when needed.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Whenever it snows and snow lays on the ground and trees, we're very likely to say, the snow is wit. The snow is wit, meaning the snow is white. The sneeuw is wit was the first full sentence our oldest son, Dennis Tyke, said when we lived on the East Coast. It's a long time ago. The little man, now a big guy, is nearing 60 years old. This past weekend, as it snowed, we again repeated the short sentence and remembered, the sneeuw is wit. Now mind you, snow is not always white. Once I walked the edges of a glacier, and what looked like white snow from a distance looked more like black coal from close up. But talking about color, I came across an interesting article in regard to the color purple. Of course, here in Manhattan and across the state, the color purple is a favorite. As they say, some people will even bleed purple. And it is true, at ball games especially, when the game is held on campus, the color purple is everywhere. I'll make you a bet that all the color purple is not even visible, as I've seen purple-colored garments which are not shown in public. There are whole catalogs with purple stuff. I do have a couple of purple handkerchiefs, which come in very handy when needed. A recycling company has a large truck painted purple, making its regular route collecting stuff. Some of the stuff, I'm sure, must be purple. Driving across the state, I've seen purple in its far corners. I've seen purple homes, but mostly the purple flags, with the fierce wildcat, are on display. I've seen purple on clotheslines drying in the Kansas wind, although I expect most go through the dryer. Altogether, it's a heck of a lot of purple, made purple with purple dye. But purple, the color purple, has not always been common. In the past, purple had a royal restriction because the dye was very expensive and difficult to obtain. It was made of the mucus of sea snails. The fact that it was very expensive to make made it one of the coveted colors. It denoted wealth and power. To make a small amount of dye, a large amount of snail's mucus was needed. In an article written by Annalisa Barbier, I read that in what is now Lebanon was a Phoenician city near the coastline on the Mediterranean Sea where the snails lived and apparently can still be found. Luckily, the snail is no longer needed because a teenager with an interest in chemistry found by accident, as he was working in his primitive laboratory, a concoction which was the basis for the future purple dye. That was in 1856. No longer was purple made from natural dye. Now, chemistry could do the trick. Chemistry made purple a common color. On the color wheel, it sits between blue and red. I think today we still look at purple, though, with different eyes, as when we see red or pink or yellow. Part of that is because of its history. As I said, it was the color of the rich and important people, some who thought themselves important. But at one time, there were laws which forbid common people to display purple, and apparently people have been killed for not following the law. The next time you come to a ball game, think about that. It's hard to believe, but it's all the game of power. I read that Julius Caesar was very partial to purple. When he visited Cleopatra and saw purple sails on her ships and other display in her palace, he came home with a purple toga, which he decreed only he, Caesar, could wear. At that time, the purple toga was dyed purple with the spittle of the tiny snail. Quite a thought. What strikes me is to have at one time been forbidden to wear purple, wearing or displaying it would have been at a high risk. One can easily dismiss that fact. But remember, it was research, chemistry, which over time changed that. But even today, the color purple still holds a special feeling when displayed in art form. It may be the form of a necktie, in a suit, or a dress for a special occasion. If you don't sense it, think about it. The chemical purple dye was first recognized by chance, as I said, through an experiment by Henry Perkins in 1856. The original experiment was a failure. Kansas State was founded in 1863. That's only 7 years later. What intrigues me is the color of the university, then in college, is royal purple and white. The white I see in the snow, but the royal purple here in Kansas, of all places. When I looked up royal purple in the history of Kansas State College of Agriculture and Applied Science, I only found a reference as adequate summaries in royal purple with reference to the collegian. It seems that around 1910, the annual or multiple yearbook written needed a name, and royal purple was adopted. But I do not know if it was then that purple was introduced. I'm still intrigued by purple.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. That brings our Wednesday edition to a close. We thank you for being along with us and ask you to rejoin us here tomorrow this same time. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.